Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's version of the Fireside Chat Series. We're excited to have you here. I'm Andrew Daniel, Senior Investment Banker here at Digital Capital Advisors. For those of you that don't know, Digital Capital Advisors is a global technology-focused investment bank with offices in New York, Berlin, and San Francisco. We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary actually next month in September, and this is a part of that celebration. We're very excited here at DCA to get to that 10-year milestone. This series, for those of you who haven't listened in today, features world-class founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs from companies that we really like and industries that we find compelling. Today, we are lucky to have the co-founder and CEO of a business called Blueshift, a customer data platform. Vijay, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you here.
Thanks, Andrew. Excited to be here.
Terrific. Well, why don't we start by giving everybody kind of an overview of Blueshift and what you guys do? Maybe you could tell the story a little bit and the evolution and how you've gotten to where you are today. And certainly would love to hear about some of the product and capabilities that you guys have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great start. So, Blueshift is a customer data platform, as you mentioned. But specifically, what we do in the customer data platform world is act sort of as a smart hub for all your marketing and customer experience orchestration. And the way that works is that, brands who work with us, consumer brands, are using Blueshift to centralize all of their data, but more importantly, derive a lot of AI-based insights on their customers. And finally, to close that last mile, they're able to act on those insights in real time. So, for example, if it's a personal finance company, they detect based on the data that you are, somebody who has a high propensity for mortgage or credit card or whatever that might be. They're able to immediately, in the marketing world, add you into a paid media audience, trigger emails, maybe send you a piece of direct mail, maybe initiate like a conversational message through a chat application, maybe push data into a CRM to start, informing relationship managers or salespeople that, here's sort of the right message and the offer for Andrew. And as that happens, it starts becoming sort of a very intelligent hub for all decision making. And the reason sort of we got there is, if you think about it, I mean, today's world, you and I are also consumers of many, many brands. And if you just look at our own behavior, we are, interacting with these brands and leaving behind so much data because we are always on, right? And this is sort of first party data that we are directly leaving with the brand with consent and through engagement. And, on the one hand, like the amount of that data has grown literally 1000x in the last 10 odd years, right? And on the other hand, I mean, if you think about our experience with brands, I mean, we are connecting with these brands on more and more touch points and more, customer experience application or customer experience touch points that we are connecting with them on, right? And every brand is now sort of looking at that and struggling with it to say, how do I make sense of all my data on all my customer experience touch points, right? Because that's, in the old days, you could just say, well, I have this email thing, which is all about batch and blast, and I just need to have like an email list, and that's all the data I need for email. And then I have like, maybe a different part of the experience, which happens, in store, and I just have like a, sort of a list, against that. And there was very little data 10 or 15 years back, and, there were very few interaction touch points, and there was no need to really start intelligently orchestrating them. But I think that world has changed now because of customers like us, right? And how we have kind of changed. And because of that change, I think every brand needs to start figuring out sort of like, how do I take, so much data, make smart decisions, and be consistent and intelligent at every touch point with a customer. And as that shift has happened, I think, in my own background, I've seen that shift kind of play out. So if I look at my co-founders and I, you asked about sort of the backstory of the company. So I think before starting Blueshift, my co-founders and I, we had spent 8 years kind of working together in other capacities, right? And then really two of those, experiences really stand out. One of them was sort of building a company that eventually got acquired by Groupon and became Groupon Goods, which became a pretty massive consumer business for Groupon. And prior to that, we were part of an AI company which called Cosmics, which got acquired by Walmart and became Walmart Labs, really powering sort of a lot of intelligent interactions for Walmart. But even at those places, when we saw sort of the state of the art and we started seeing like what the legacy tech stack is doing for marketers and for customer experience professionals who want to sort of start acting with high agility and be able to react in near real time and be able to craft like experiences that they can distribute quickly. Uh, in our in our experience, we found that most marketers and customer experience professionals, they are not short of ideas. They are short of like a system or a platform which can enable them to act with high agility on those ideas
Sure.
and be able to measure, distribute, orchestrate that entire experience. And that's sort of what led us to found Blueshift. I think, obviously, in our background, we've seen the world of marketing. We've been marketers ourselves, but we've also been like, as part of a broader team, we've also been doing AI and machine learning from way before it was fashionable. So, so in some ways, like I think that combination of like saying, how do you use machine powered intelligence to deliver human feeling experiences. We sort of had that thought when we founded the company, and that idea of like how do you act as that smart sort of hub which orchestrates all these intelligent experiences sort of was the core of how we thought about it. And I think that opportunity has only become more relevant over time with as we see today's brands, they're launching more and more customer facing applications, be it new channels like chatbots or old channels which are becoming programmatic or people addressable, like an addressable TV. So as that sort of explosion kind of happens on the customer experience world, where you sort of start having more and more touch points and you start having more and more data, in some ways, like the original thesis of Blueshift, that you can use data to make intelligent decisions and distribute on all these different touch points, has only become more meaningful, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that people struggle with, this is true for bankers, this is true for investors and acquirers,
Right.
and certainly customers, is as they look out into the CDP landscape, there are so many providers, right? And I think we know that as we look at the stack of providers, the lower half is in general pretty bad, right? I mean, there's just a lot of junk that exists there. But even in the upper half, sometimes the differentiation is relatively nuanced. And so I'd be curious, as you guys think about Blue Shift relative really to the upper half of the competitive ecosystem or landscape, if you will, how do you think about the key differentiators and some of the USPs that Blueshift has where others might not?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question and a good articulation of the landscape. And I think that's why this notion of a SmartHub CDP, which I think initially was coined by Gartner, but very apt, I think, is somewhat self-descriptive in figuring out sort of like what are the components of what you need to achieve and also where the differentiation lies. So if I think about the three pieces of SmartHub CDP, is CDP part at a high level describes just the data and identity resolution capabilities, right? So the idea is like that you need to be able to resolve multiple types of identities. You need to be able to bring data from multiple source systems where maybe a transaction might have originated or a behavior might have happened on a website or a call might have been recorded in a call center or whatever that might be. And all these source systems are recording some data and they're recording in multiple different formats. How do you unify all of that? That's sort of the CDP part of it. But if you think about the smart part of it, that's really about the AI powered intelligence, right? You start saying, okay, now I have all this data. If I gave it to a data scientist, if it takes them, a ton of time to just actually start normalizing data, extracting features, building models, and each model takes like months to kind of build, productionize all of that stuff. How can I bring a lot more agility because I have this data in unified index kind of format, and that agility is really about being able to build and deploy many kinds of like an intelligence. And at a high level, I would describe that as like the who, what, when, and where of marketing or customer experience, right? Who should you, if you have an offer or a piece of content or a product or something that you want to communicate to a customer, who should you be communicating to? And that could be a one-to-one decision based on action of the customer. What should you be saying to them? Like what content, what product, what offer should you be merchandising? And obviously the when and the where is really about all the different applications where you could reach that customer. Should that be a paid media application? Should that be a call center application? Should that be a CRM or whatever that might be? So really, I think the smart part is about the AI and the capabilities about that, which is the who, what, when, and where. And then finally, the hub part, I think. So we talked about the CDP, the profile unification, the AI, but then the hub part is really about saying it's great to have all the insights, but all of that is meaningless unless I can act on it in real time, unless I can make smart decisions which connect to all these different applications, and I can orchestrate between those, and I can make different decisions for different domains. Like I can understand how a CRM system or a sales interaction behaves versus like a email or a direct mail or IVR or addressable TV or SMS or whatever that might be, right? So if I think about that, I think that is a good way to kind of ground your thinking of the landscape, right? I think that's a good framework. And I think specifically within that, I think obviously there are CDPs who are very focused on just being a data infrastructure. I think, and maybe they don't even fall into the CDP, SmartHub CDP nomenclature at all, right? So there are companies who are focused on sort of the solving some problems for IT around ETL and sort of like getting data into a data warehouse. And there are some presumably good companies in that space, but that they probably do not fall into the CDP SmartHub bucket at all. But I think even among the contenders who sort of fall into this SmartHub CDP bucket, when you look at most of them, I think many of them arguably have started with saying, how do I unify data and actually just get multiple data sources into one place, and maybe there's some identity work that has been done, which is good. So I think there again, I think arguably I would say we have a lot of differentiation there, but I think at the same time, I'd also concede that many players have kind of started building data aggregation capabilities, if you will. But I think where the differentiation really comes in is the smart and the hub, right? And I think the AI and the real-time decisioning, right? And I think those are, so critical to all these brands today to deliver the right experience. And when you think about that, I think on the smart part, which is the AI part, I think arguably, again, I might not have fully surveyed the landscape, but as far as I know, I think we have Blueshift as the only company in the space with like patented AI technology, right? And obviously a team that's been, doing AI ML for a long time. And if you look at the usage among customers, all of them are using that AI in a very deep, meaningful manner, right? So they are, whether it's that personal finance company figuring out sort of like mortgage propensity and the right, credit offer recommendations, or if it's a streaming services, like a company online which is trying to figure out which show to merchandise or which episode, and how do I get all of that in front of you and doing that at scale, or a healthcare company trying to figure out how do I optimize my member experience for for recommending the right service. All of those are pretty deep, meaningful uses of AI. And that's where I think even early on, like even a couple of years back, I remember when Gartner was starting to think about AI and marketing as a category, I think they were one of the first names that they put in that list was kind of Blueshift, right? And that has been good validation as well. So that's the smart part, which is a huge piece of differentiation. But then I think the hub part, which is really saying how do I make connected decisions? I think that's another huge area where I think like many CDPs fall short, right? And I think many of them have maybe built integration in the connector, but really when you think about hub, you really want to make that decisioning. You want to make that decision at scale. You want to be able to make it in real time. You want to be able to orchestrate all of that and sequence it and create sort of a journey, right? And in some ways, like what we are setting out to build is sort of what I call a self-driving kind of customer journey, right? So I think really that notion and the power of the real-time decisioning is a huge differentiation. So if I look at the SmartHub CDP case, I think obviously some companies don't even fall in that bucket, like they're too focused on maybe a CDI data infrastructure piece. But the ones who do fall in that space, maybe many of them have just done the CDP part to some extent, and smart and the hub part are obviously lacking to a large extent in the market, and that's where we sort of fill in the gap and our customers sort of find a lot of value. And finally, I think to close the loop, you might start saying, is it all really valuable to a customer to do all this, or should they just stick with data unification, right? And I think for that reason, we actually asked Forrester to go study sort of the impact of this on customers' businesses, right? So we asked them and say, here are a bunch of our customers, go talk to them, and like obviously independently sort of like come up with sort of your analysis on like how all this is working out. And I think when Forrester sort of came back and published that report, it's like a pretty detailed 30-page report. But the summary of it is that this approach, the smart hub sort of data activation, intelligent decisioning approach, leads to a 781% ROI.
Oh, wow.
Right, and that's truly off the charts. I mean, I'll take when I share that with marketers or when brands will look at it. I mean, obviously our customers say, of course, I mean that's true. And we recently had the CEO of one of our customers on our virtual conference, and he was talking about how it drove a 40x growth for them. Like, and he took a moment to emphasize it's not 4x, it's actually 40x. So I think our customers obviously know, but a lot of the market suddenly looks at that and says, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then they start asking, so what drives that ROI, right? And like, how are you able to get 781%? Like, what is that? Is it just a made up number, or what are the components of it? And again, I think the Forrester report is actually very nice in that respect, where they break it down. And they break it down. I think the three components for them are really, number one is the AI powered targeting, real time interactions, and cross channel scale, right? So if you think about that, the AI, real time decisioning, and cross channel scale, it really goes back to that thesis of the SmartHub sort of positioning, and where you're acting as sort of that centralized decisioning hub for all of marketing, and then increasingly for even non-marketing sort of customer experience applications. So that's sort of how I would paint the landscape and our approach, and why that approach matters to sort of every brand out there.
Absolutely. And I think what I'll echo is this, as we think about the landscape and ultimately the evolution of CDP,
Yeah,
is that, where did CDPs come from, right? Often from tag managers, from DMPs, from all these different places where CDP
right,
buzzword is you had players kind of evolve into a CDP. And I think as we look at the landscape, and I mentioned that top half and bottom half, particularly if you're in the bottom half, you have a lot of players who have arrived from something else, and they're thinking a lot about the infrastructure, right? They want to be the pipes, if you will, to bring in the source
right,
data into a singular spot. And as we think about the upper half of the market today, we look at that and say relatively commoditized, right? I mean, yes, there are some players, maybe a segment, or others who are leading the front or have historically been around for a long time and integrating particularly complex source data. But for the most part,
right,
that integration step is commoditized and not terribly differentiated. Where you begin to get differentiation in aggregate, not just for Blueshift, but in kind of the landscape itself, particularly true in the upper half of the market, is around the layering of intelligence, right? Once you have a singular spot where you have all your data in a single place, then it's about, where do you derive actionable insight out of that data set? And there's been a lot of capability, I think, in players like Blueshift and others to come up with really creative ways to leverage either AI/ML or leverage other kinds of insight generation to say, well,
right,
we know that Vijay likes emails to come to him on Thursday and has a high propensity if you put the color X on, right? And we understand
right,
characteristics, understand personalities, and we're really doing something far more complex than just integrating the data. And then I think, much like you just said, what happens then from a differentiation perspective is a lot of that gets stuck. It's difficult to link those action insights to execution, even if they are actionable,
right,
if they're done in real time. And so there's very few players, and you guys are in this front of, can we link this real-time actionable insight, knowing that actionable insight is differentiated on its own, to an actual execution hub or distribution channel?
right.
And then I think where it gets even more difficult is, how do you then take that execution piece, that went out and sent an email to Vijay, what did he do with that?
Yeah,
Look at it? Did he not look at it? Did he go purchase something? Was there attribution component? But how do you take that data and then feed it back into the CDP, which in our eyes builds that cycle that ultimately is the hub of iteration and optimization, so we can improve the ability to personally target somebody? And in the landscape, if you start trying to bring that cycle together, of course, Gartner calls it
right,
Smart Hub, and you guys call it Smart Hub, but if you start really trying to get down to who can do this today because you believe in the value, and clearly you guys have demonstrated it, it becomes a very short list very quickly. And you end up with an ecosystem, I think, broadly that really is fundamentally challenged, and for customers is challenged because they don't understand the nuances between the different platforms, and sometimes get lost in this idea of, well, they're aggregating all our data, and that sounds exciting, without linking that directly to ROI. And I think in our eyes, we'll talk about COVID-19 effects in a little bit, but COVID-19 is forcing marketers to do a few things that'll have really profound effects on the landscape. One is they're going to go out and look at their dollars that they're spending on software licenses out of marketing and say, is there
right,
an ROI for the dollars that we're spending? And the reality is that in the bottom half of the market where you have poor providers, the answer is probably no, right? Or certainly a limited ROI. Two, it's going to force people to ultimately leave platforms and release customers into the environment, which gives
right,
the market an opportunity to go acquire those customers. And I think finally, it's really bringing awareness that the marketer is going to want to understand a rapidly changing consumer, which again, we'll talk about in a second. But the consumer is changing fundamentally. Enterprise wants to understand that. And
yeah,
a very interesting way to get closer to personalization, and really a fully attributed MarTech stack, which is kind of the holy grail. And so for me, that level of interest from the consumption side is going to come in quite strong from the enterprise.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think it's funny that you use the words data gets stuck. And I think that resonates a lot with me. And if I like to joke a little bit that, I think obviously the name Blueshift, the real reason we came up with the name was, in Doppler effect, obviously when things are moving closer to you, it's shifting towards the, blue end
Sure.
of the spectrum. And, for us, the idea resonated that, bringing brands sort of closer to customers and that's the real reason for the name Blueshift. But as it relates to sort of the point you were making, I think I like to joke about how like there's also a Redshift, which just incidentally happens to be a data warehouse, right? And if you think about sort of Blueshift sort of being this company that sort of like really puts your data to work, and like a data warehouse being a place where the data goes to sleep. I sort of talk about how like Redshift is where data goes to sleep and customer data goes to sleep, and Blueshift is where customer data goes to work. And I think that distinction is interesting. I mean, obviously, Redshift is a great data warehouse, and nothing against it. But I think what brands are increasingly realizing is that they start needing an engine which really puts your customer data to work, provides high agility of the data, not just the high fidelity that you get in a data warehouse where you have data completeness, but if you want to start using that data for a customer experience, it takes weeks or months to kind of deliver that. And obviously, even the first batch of CDPs, as you call them, like we're all trying to be maybe a warehouse plus plus, right, of sorts, and maybe some of them went slightly beyond that. But I think where many CDPs are still struggling is like they are not really bringing that data agility to the forward edge of the marketing and customer experience world. And consumers like us want sort of those intelligent real-time experiences, and obviously to deliver that, I think the marketing professionals, CF professionals, just need to be able to act on data with like high agility and be able to orchestrate all these experiences. And I think that's where I think there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of pain, and that's sort of the reason why we are building our solution the way we are building it, focusing a lot more on that smart and the hub, in addition to the CDP.
Absolutely. I think that's a very natural segue into, what is the state of CDP in the MarTech stack today, right? As you look at the MarTech stack and how CDPs are actually being
Yeah,
utilized, we all know we want to get to the MarTech stack 2.0, which we'll talk about in a little bit,
right,
but we're certainly not there today. And I think we're at a variety of iterations against that MarTech stack 2.0.
right.
In our eyes, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, as you think about large enterprise, they're living with the large MarTech players, and you can name who you'd like, but in Oracle and Adobe, and Salesforce, et cetera, those players have done a good job in buying lots of solutions and looking at the
Right.
1,000 providers in MarTech and saying, I can own a decent combination of these. The challenge being that when you start stacking all those things together, the analogy I kind of do, pass it across the way to large enterprise, they
Yeah.
look at it and go, doesn't feel terribly efficient. The ROI doesn't feel that strong, but we're a big enterprise. I guess we'll do the lift, and they integrate it and they bring it in, but they realize
Right.
there's no interconnectivity, right? All those solutions are piled together. There's no way to interconnect them, and a large enterprise kind of has to live with that, just given the complexity of what they have, and they're okay
Yeah.
for the most part. But when Adobe and Oracle and Salesforce and whoever figured out that they kind of ran out of large enterprise clients to go acquire, right? The growth was starting to
Yeah.
slow. They take that same pile of stuff to a middle market client and middle market enterprise and pass it across the
Yeah.
laugh out of the room, right? No way. We're not going to touch that. We're looking for strong ROI. We're not going to wait a year to try to integrate. Like, no way. And I think CDPs was a way for them to try to address that problem with the hope that if they built something of their own, acquired something of their own, they could link those solutions together a little bit better. And I think we saw them do that, right? I mean, all of them kind of built or purchased their own. And unfortunately, I think as you're talking about the agility of data and why I think there's a segue here, yes, they built some kind of pipes, but it was really a data warehouse, right? And it didn't turn in the sense of we have
Right.
the ability now to optimize our entire suite of solutions. Instead, it's just a thing that you can go check on what's going on and get to a point where you can see the data. Maybe there's some attractive looking charts, but there's no way to
Right.
do this thing. And back to my original question, as I think about that MarTech landscape today and where CDPs are fitting in, I think for the most part, CDPs aren't utilized to the extent they could be utilized. That is, they become a place where I can
Right.
consolidate my customer data, maybe drive some soft personalization, some soft targeting capability, but not really to the max of what's perhaps possible with the CDP that they're leveraging. Because
Yeah.
a lot of this lack of data agility that exists, and I think that has a very profound effect in an environment where customers want to be increasingly targeted against, increasingly personalized towards. And so
Yeah.
I'd be curious how you think about kind of the MarTech ecosystem and how CDPs are being
Yeah.
utilized today.
Yeah, no, I think before I directly answer that, let me just step back and share some context as to why things need
Yeah.
to change, right? I think you captured some of that, but I think really if I think about sort of, it's always good to look at kind of extremes. So if I look at like 40 years ago and compare that to now, I think that's obviously a pretty stark picture. But if you think about sort of like 30, 40 years ago, like marketing was kind of on the billboard, right? And maybe on TV, right? And the customer experience was kind of in the bank branch or the store or the call center. So the customer, you could, there was nothing about the customer on the billboard. There was nothing about the individual customer on the TV ad and so on. And really the role of marketing was to drive the customer into the experience, right? So it was kind of like saying, start with a brand message, tell the customer, go get that experience, right? And where you get that experience could be in all these different places. And I think then come 20 years ago, and like you sort of start saying there's some wave of digital kind of starting to happen, right? So then the billboard becomes like an email or a banner ad. And then the experience maybe still is in the bank branch and store, but it's also in like a website or a app or whatever that might be. But I think the first wave of that digital was still about driving, the customer to the experience, right? So it was kind of saying, here's a message, and then, I'll basically, slap a billboard onto an email, right? So essentially kind of like a batch and blast
Yeah.
email, all about saying, I just took like the message I would have put on a banner, on a billboard or a banner ad, and I just sort of put that in an email or display ad and sort of push it out to you, right? And that, that paradigm was all about saying, how do I, push customers from into sort of trying out the experience or whatever that might be. And as you think about that paradigm, really the software systems that were built were very channel centric. They really had to be able to be very good at like slapping billboards onto an email or slapping a billboard onto a banner ad and whatever that might be. And like really there was a lot of focus on the channel, and there was very little focus on the customer, right? And I think and that made sense. I mean, at that time, there was very little, as we said, customer data and all that. But today, I think as I talk to most CMOs out there, when I talk to them, the experiences they want to create or the kind of marketing they want to create is experience first, right? So they want to say, well, Daniel interacted with my brand in certain ways. If it's a personal finance company or a bank, they're trying to say, what would my relationship manager have said to you? And convert that into a data driven nugget of experience and deliver that through a marketing channel, right? So the channel is kind of like an afterthought and not sort of like the starting point, right? It wasn't like saying start from billboard and wherever, end up wherever, but really now it's really saying, how do I figure out the kernel of that experience, which could be, recommendation of a offer or content or product personalized to you. It could be a trigger moment where it says, okay, Daniel showed interest in these categories and something new has happened in those new products have gotten introduced, something has changed, and I need to like now deliver that aha back to him, and that'll be seen by Daniel as an experience. And it just so happens that I'm delivering that through an email or a push notification on mobile or an SMS or a direct mail or a ad or a IVR or whatever that might be. But the channel is like now kind of secondary, right? In some ways, like it starts with that data change and the kernel. So as that big shift has happened for CMOs, they're saying like instead of my role being to take the customer, to tell the customer to go to the experience or bring the customer to the experience, that was the old paradigm. And maybe that exists to some extent today. But I think today focus 80% of it is really saying, how do I take the experience to the customer, right? And use all these channels as distribution touch points. And if you think about that paradigm, you have to really understand the customer first. You have to really figure out what those next best actions or offers are for the customer. You have to figure out what those trigger moments are when you need to communicate with them. You have to figure out what channels they want to be engaged on because, again, it's like a customer centric paradigm. And then once you have all that, you've got to start saying, okay, now, whatever channel, let's just execute on that, right? And as that paradigm shift happens, I think you mentioned obviously the marketing clouds, and a lot of them were built on obviously acquisitions of channel first kind of companies, right? And they were not built on kind of the experience first or the data first kind of companies. And so they are, I think all these companies have a lot of interesting applications. Maybe they're marketing automation application, maybe it's a DMP and all of that, but really there's a hollow kind of core, right? So really, I think if you think about the center of that circle, they just don't have any place to go with high agility to go grab what's right next best action for that customer, to figure out when to engage, what's the right trigger moment for that customer, when to what to save, should I even show an ad to the customer, all of that. And I think almost the paradigm is we flip, and instead of these applications trying to find where to go get the data, like the because you want to start being customer experience first, you've got to have like the customer experience core, or the decisioning core, where you can start bringing the data but make those AI based decisions and then distribute it to any application, right? So that application could actually be one of the marketing cloud applications, which could be maybe handling email for doing, maybe those applications do a good job of handling email, right? Or maybe it's an application that sort of like figures out paid media audiences, or it's an application that sort of like figures out in some ways multi-touch attribution or whatever that might be, or it could be even something outside of marketing. It could be a DXP application. It could be a help desk application, which is really trying to figure out like how do I proactively prevent kind of churn, right? So, but I think really it's in that evolution. I mean, for good reason. I think like the marketing clouds have been built with sort of the channel first, or the delivery first kind of mentality, right? So they just said, I just need to deliver the message, and obviously way back in marketing, people used to say the medium is the message, and I think now it's coming to a point where the message is a message, and you really want to kind of figure out what's the customer core, and obviously the medium is still important, but I think CMOs are starting to realize there's a big paradigm shift. And when they evaluate sort of, the marketing clouds against that paradigm shift, they see this hollow core. And I think the marketing clouds are starting to maybe trying to address that, saying, well, we'll kind of fill it in through integrations or whatnot. But integrations, data plumbing, that doesn't quite cut it. You really have to have the paradigm where it starts with that customer decisioning first, right? And then the afterthought of like the delivery applications later. And that paradigm shift has happened over some time, and kind of caught maybe the legacy players sort of on the wrong, they are sort of in the wrong position for that shift. And obviously, like you mentioned, I mean, that is playing out much more easily in the mid market, because a lot of mid market customers are starting to say, well, I can make the decision from scratch. I'm not sort of embedded in legacy at all. But I think it's coming to the enterprise as well, where enterprise companies are saying, look, enterprise brands are saying, look, I have all these legacy applications. I'm missing the core. I would love to shift the paradigm where it's the SmartHub first, decisioning first, and then sort of the delivery as an afterthought, right? And I think that's the real opportunity for this space, right? And that's why I think specifically that approach of the SmartHub CDP makes sense, because you obviously have to, if you just did data integration, and if you just did like data plumbing and you routed raw data everywhere, that still doesn't quite cut it, right? You have to be able to be in a position where the core has to be able to distribute an experience out to this last mile application. And only sort of a SmartHub CDP can do that. And I think as that happens, I think then the SmartHub CDP sort of becomes the centerpiece of that MarTech stack. And anything that's a centerpiece of that MarTech stack, and maybe even a broader CX stack, is very, very interesting and valuable to customers, because that's what drives the ROI. I mean, no wonder why, the Forrester study found sort of like that approach sort of drives that ROI, because that's kind of what our customers are already doing. And obviously our customers are at the cutting edge of, leading edge of this wave. But our belief is that the whole, industry, every brand will start wanting to have that SmartHub at the core of their, MarTech stack, and increasingly also at the center of their CX stack.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, as we think about MarTech Stack 2.0, maybe we can talk about that a little bit and what that next looks like. I think it is really that adoption, as you're talking about now, of a smart hub at the center. And that smart hub is likely going to be something that feels a whole lot like a CDP. Now, whether or not it's labeled a CDP,
right,
who knows? But it's going to feel a lot like that, in the sense that not only can it pull in all of the source data that's necessary in an increasingly complex environment, not only can it bring that into a single aggregated place, but it'll also introduce, in our eyes, additional data sets. So identity becomes really important. Understanding devices.
That's exactly right.
Understanding the history of behavior in a more complex way than just integrating the data that you have as an enterprise. And then it's going to do a lot more, I think, what we see today. There's a lot of room for growth with regards to the level of insight and granularity of targeting preferences and information about somebody and everything else, where there is a very, very deep knowledge that is being created about each individual customer that gives us then a base to go build execution off of. But for us, we're still a while away. I mean, I think the technology is approaching that point where you get to
Right.
CDP or whatever it is to be powerful enough. But that actual stack doesn't exist today. And so for us, as we think about that, you can then take that actionable insight and go execute it not only in a MarTech setting, but in an ad tech setting, in a customer service setting, and in everything you could possibly imagine,
That's right.
where you really have this engine that sits at the center of everything the enterprise is going to do, as you're saying, at the core. And unfortunately, today, that doesn't exist, right? That combination of assets doesn't exist today. And I think one of the things that we think about as a bank is how do you get there, right? And it is the
Right.
you start with an execution hub. So you'd have somebody who's in maybe marketing automation or whoever else, and they're doing a lot of execution work today. And then you introduce a CDP to that. And that's difficult for its own set of reasons, mainly the integration risk. Then you
Right.
go the other way, and so maybe we start with a superpowered CDP and then start buying the other components that might complete the outside of that circle. Do you go a totally different way and try to buy a piece of that circle and then introduce a CDP? So there's lots of different ways to get there, but that's where we think we're headed, and that's what I think that MarTech Stack 2.0 looks like. And that becomes a very dangerous entrant relative to the legacy MarTech guys, to some of the pure play CDPs today,
Right.
and one that I think is very powerful. But as you're pointing out, it all comes down to how much information can we capture from somebody, and I think on a daily basis, the amount of data points create is increasing.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
little more to understand. In a non-third-party cookie world, there's a lot of interesting things to be done with identity, transactional data, et cetera. I just had
Yeah.
Peter on here the other day, and they were talking about partnering with Visa and MasterCard to bring in the data from the transactional perspective. But then ultimately, if you can really understand that consumer, your targeting and personalization capabilities, where everybody wants to get to, is fundamentally unlimited. And then if you can do a great job of building that linkage between everything, which I think is where a lot of folks struggle today,
Yeah.
excellent. You have a real advantage as that MarTech Stack 2.0. But would be curious how you see that MarTech Stack 2.0 and where do CDPs fit in against it? I imagine it's similar, but would be curious.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're spot on. I think there is going to be a MarTech Stack 2.0, and maybe there's also going to be a broader customer experience stack 2.0 in some sense, right? And I think because of how consumers have changed and because of how brands are starting to say, I want to start from sort of that data decisioning first, right? And sort of treat the delivery as sort of like a not for an afterthought. I mean, obviously it has to be integrated, but it doesn't start with the delivery first, right? It doesn't start with saying I'm just creating sort of like a an email program. I think that's just not the
Agreed.
world where most companies are right now. So as a paradigm sort of shifts, I think it'll have like some implications for maybe the center of the MarTech stack and the CX stack. And I think companies will start realizing, look, I need to have this central decisioning at the center of this stack. I need to then be able to plug in all applications. Obviously, decisioning is good only if you're able to plug in all these different applications into that decisioning.
Sure.
And those applications include, I think you mentioned marketing automation. I think that typically covers like a email, mobile push, SMS, maybe website, and so on. So maybe the A/B testing. So those applications have got to be connected. You mentioned ad tech, paid media, so you definitely have got to connect like addressable TV, custom audiences, multi-touch attribution applications, all of that into this core. So that completes maybe the MarTech picture. And then you start saying, well, if I'm doing all this, like, why am I not taking that extensive view of the customer? Because marketing's view of the customer starts from, much more expansive than like a sales view or a help desk view, right? Because when I call as a help desk, I can't just be an anonymous customer. I had to be like a known paying customer in some ways, right? But I think like in marketing, I could just be browsing on the website and marketing is sort of interested in targeting me. So I think marketing has a very broad view of the customer, and marketing is trying to make a broader decision set across all those customers. So then companies and customers, brands start saying, well, if I'm building the smart hub for marketing, I should also have it influence my DXP for product experiences. I should have it influence my CRM for call-based experiences, like sales-based experiences, right? And it should have it influence my help desk for support-based experiences, and I should have it influence my loyalty program. I should have it influence my merchandising, system, and so all of that, right? And I think that leads to a shift where I think you need to be able to architect your stack that way, right? And I think as that happens, it'll have implications for a lot of brands. Firstly, I think like the customer comes first. I mean, so really in this case, as you think with the enterprise customer, they have to build their stack, so they will be the first sort of ones to recognize this, and obviously it'll play into the solution provider landscape as well, like you mentioned. So I think it does have implications for everyone. I think as you think about that decision, how do you distribute it, there are nuances that you need to address because some of these decisions are just point in time decisions. Like I just sent you a notification, right? And that's just one point in time, and I could sequence them in a certain form. Some of them are sort of like windows of time where I'm trying to address, you in a paid media setting over a certain period of time because I just don't know what point in time you'll be actually, on that paid media site and so on. And there could be some live like interactions where you could come to my site or a chatbot and say, I need an answer or response. And those are also points in time, but they're pulled by you. And I think as you think about all these different applications, they do fit one of these three paradigms. And, but, the Smart Hub has to be capable of recognizing sort of all these different paradigms and being able to connect to all these different applications to be able to say the way I influence a help desk is different from the way I influence like a SMS system or an email system or direct mail system or a CRM system and so on. And I think that's where the making sure that from a customer point of view, from a brand point of view, figuring out that they have the right hub which can scale to that extent, which can because oftentimes the brand would deploy it maybe for those marketing automation applications first, then maybe going to paid media, and then maybe going to the broader CX realm. But even as they're choosing it, to make sure that they're picking a system which can actually scale to all these different applications going to be very important, right? And for those other applications, which are in other domains, which are maybe sitting at the center of a sales tech stack, like a CRM or a DXP, which is sitting at the product experience kind of like stack, it'll be important to kind of like make sure there's interconnectivity with this SmartHub CDP, and for SmartHub CDP, it'll be important to be able to interconnect with those systems as well, right? And I think that'll have profound implication of how the whole stack will kind of change. And I think you captured some specifics of that pretty well. So I don't think I have much to add there, but I think it's a pretty profound shift in the ecosystem. So that's kind of, how I look at it.
Yeah. One of the things that just brought to mind is, as we think about this landscape, right, you kind of think it horizontally, you start with data and you finish over here with kind of the action,
right,
and finally get to execution. But on the data side of the equation, one of the things that's been interesting as we speak to lots of companies is everybody is on the hunt to understand the customer better and to give more data, right? And that's true no matter what the source is. And I was just on the phone this morning with a retail technology company that, again, is thinking about if somebody's shopping in a store, can we use optical tracking technologies to tell you which products they have a higher propensity to go look at, or they might want to be targeted. And what's interesting, and I think the time frame here is the big question, right? That's what everybody wants to know. How quickly does this ultimately happen? Are we 1 year out? Are we 5 years out? Are we 50 years out? And who knows what it is, hopefully not. But as you think further and further downstream, and the little parts take up to the bigger part, for us, as we have conversations, everybody is on the hunt for better data granularity. Everybody is on the hunt for more insight. And it'll be interesting to see the evolution of what I consider data to be the commoditized component, which is the aggregation of the data, but that ultimately those actionable insights are only ever going to be as good as the data that they're being built off of. And that data improves both on a quality and a dynamic capability perspective. You end up with a lot of very interesting use cases that feed into the knowledge base. And that, I think, is really exciting. From an evolution perspective, that affects the evolution outside of just the MarTech stack and really start base level data and then builds into the broader MarTech stack.
No, that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. I think the full evolution will probably, to your point, I mean, there's a time frame to it. It might take years, but I think the MarTech, if you were to start as just MarTech as the MarTech stack changing without the full multi-functional experience kind of changing, I think the MarTech stack changing is happening now. Right. I think that time frame is, I would say, right now, I think people are sort of starting to really put a central decision. At least it's starting now. I don't know if it's gone, the bulk of the market is there yet. But I think, the forward-thinking folks are already doing it. And we are seeing that in our customer base. And I think maybe the time frame for that outer circle of like saying, how does it extend beyond marketing, or how does marketing sort of interplay nicely with all these other functions, is maybe, I would definitely not say 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's probably 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in that time frame, but it's in fairly a near term time frame for that too. But I think if I would say, if on the marketing side, if you're a brand who is really thinking about building a MarTech stack, and if you're not thinking about it this way today, and if you're not thinking about sort of a central decisioning hub that automates all of your, orchestrates all of your, channel applications, insights applications, conversational applications, paid media applications, all of that, then you're already starting to fall behind just a little bit. And I think within 2 years, you'll be pretty far behind if you have not thought about it. I think maybe if you're a broader sort of, cross enterprise sort of figuring out the customer journeys, maybe you have a couple more years maybe to figure that out. But I think that change is coming very soon too.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is probably a natural transition or segue to the last set of questions, which is around COVID-19.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 is doing everybody a favor here and creating kind of this perfect storm of elements where on the entire spectrum, from small guys, mom and pop type places that are really simple, not terribly complex, all
Right.
to really large enterprise brands that are dealing with, sometimes billions of dollars of budgets. There's been a real increased pressure when all of a sudden there is economic uncertainty involved, whether positive or negative. Everybody's going to go chase their budget down, as I mentioned earlier, and want to know, why am I spending this money and how is it coming back to me, right? And for folks like Blueshift who have great ROI arguments, not a problem. For folks that do not, big problem. And I think what's also going to happen is,
Right.
sort of top down, the C-suite is going to push marketers to get more creative, right? There's going to be a preference towards what can we do here to spend our dollars better, make our dollars go further, and ultimately generate
Yeah.
ROI. And I think that does really good things for the space. And I think it puts pressure on a variety of players, right? I think as I think about the Adobes and the Oracles and the
Yeah.
Salesforces again, as I go have conversations with their corp dev teams and we speak to them as strategics, they're telling me, we need to figure out how to give the best possible solutions because our large enterprises are being tempted by middle market players who, again, have better or more powerful solutions than we do today, or need to figure out how to.
Yeah.
As I speak with middle market providers like yourself, it's all about, what can we do to take advantage that we think we have on a technology basis and get it out into the market, or in CDP specifically, what can we do to acquire customers? And so on both sides, there's a push that's going on where, ultimately suppliers and platforms want to do better. They want to get customers
Right.
really progress. And a lot of the time, they have the technology, it's just not being utilized to the maximum by their customers, right? Often it's a customer lag as opposed to a technology lag. And at the same
Right.
time, from the other angle, all the brands, the customers, the enterprises pushing really hard for more. I want to do more. I want to understand where our money is going. I want to be more efficient. We want to cut out the fat. And that creates, I think, an interesting, profound challenge for agencies and consultancies and others that sometimes live in the middle
Yeah.
of people. And at the same time, all of this is being pushed by the customer, right? And as we think about the customer today, and again, I think COVID-19 throws a bit of a wrench into the equation in the sense that the customer is changing, right? We don't know how quickly or the propensity for a consumer to go back into a retail setting, as my example earlier might say. We don't know that today. We know
Yeah.
that we understand more about them, but the customer expectation, both in an online and in an offline setting, is magnified and exponentially growing in the sense that they are, frankly, expecting personalization. They're expecting really well-defined targeting. They're expecting to have interactive experiences that are customized to them. They're expecting all of these things. And that expectation is propelling, I think, the broader ecosystem, the broader space to get us closer to that MarTech Stack 2.0. But would be curious, given your boots on the ground operator, how has COVID affected you guys? What are you seeing both on the consumer and on the enterprise side? And how do you think about that as an effect on our achievement of MarTech 2.0?
Yeah, no, I think it's first of all, I mean, obviously, what's happening with COVID overall is very unfortunate. Obviously, not talking about MarTech. I mean, if we were to take a step back and just talk about impact on people all over the world. I mean, I think there's just a lot of suffering, and I think it's a very in general, COVID is a very unfortunate kind of event to have happened, and nobody obviously wishes that we were living in these times. But that being said, I mean, your point is right. I think the unintended side effect of COVID, unfortunate as it might be as an overall public health phenomenon and all of that, but the side effect of COVID as it relates to MarTech and sort of customer experiences and brands, I think it's that there is a lot of pressure to actually now be now really take that core of that customer experience and start delivering that at scale to on more of these channels, which are marketing channels, right? So I think the role of the marketing channel has become sort of much less about sort of like here's like a generic brand message, really about saying, obviously I'm not even going to the store, but like, can you bring my store to me on a marketing channel? Can you bring my bank, which is about my recommendations, my suggestions, like what a relationship manager and a bank branch would have told me, saying, "Hey, Vijay, based on all this data I have about you, based on your credit profile and mortgage and credit card stuff, here's what I would suggest to you. Like, obviously, I'm not going to the bench, so can that come to me like on like a marketing channel, right?" And I think that shift has only accelerated, right? I think it was kind of in the making, like I mentioned. I think that has accelerated a lot now, and like everyone's feeling the pressure to say, if I'm not doing that, I'm behind, right? If I am not gonna if I'm still sort of just sending you these generic messages, and if I'm not sort of tying your experience across multiple touch points, if I'm not intelligent in every interaction, if I'm not actually personalized in every interaction, if I'm not using the right moments to talk to you and just kind of targeting all the customers at the same time, and I'm actually not saying the right time to talk to Daniel when he has performed these kind of interactions, or when some interesting offer has come which is super relevant to him. Like, if I'm not doing all of that, then I'm like, as a marketer, as a brand, like falling behind, right? And I think that realization has become very stark, as you said, in the time of COVID. And I think we are seeing that in our customer base, and sort of all the CMOs that we are talking to are really saying, yes, I mean, it was always a priority, but now it's like a burning priority, and like we just gotta like address it right now. So I think that's kind of how I would look at it as the effect of COVID. I mean, obviously, I'm sure nobody wishes that we were living in these times. But I think if we were to make the best of these times, we have to realize sort of what's happening in the world, and like how consumers are changing and how brands need to change. And I think the smart CMOs are saying, okay, I got to adapt, and I got to accelerate the pace of like the shift in my sort of in how I approach marketing and how I approach sort of like building those experiences. And I think as I think about that, the imperative to have kind of that smart hub at the center of this stack just becomes even more important today than it was before. So that's maybe what I would offer, but agree with everything that you said.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, BJ,
Yeah.
this has been a blast. I certainly appreciate you taking the time again. I think everybody's going to really enjoy this one. And it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you about CDPs and MarTech Stack 2.0.
Thank you. No, it's like super exciting. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Enjoyed the discussion, and look forward to helping usher in this marketing stack 2.0. So thank you.
Terrific. All right, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.